The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested.
The Chelmsford Riverside Free-for-All was one of the oldest gun brawl events in the country. It had never been as large as the Walworth Carnage Fest or as exclusive as the Warport on Portsmouth. But it had seen a steady string of good fights for almost 3 decades. Lano had always wanted to go, but with it being in the outer district belt of the Greater London area, it was a bit of a hassle to get to, and something always came up that prompted him to stay down in Croydon. Not this year. This year was special. "Any news about him?" he asked. "Nothing. There's a post about going on a trip, I suppose," Micah responded. "Obviously, that was up 3 hours ago." Lano looked at the small crowds of players walking through the city centre. Tags were popping up over their heads, colour-coded and framed according to the prestige levels associated with them. Some obvious players had not turned theirs on yet, so they were not showing up in the org, and if Peregrine did show up, chances are he would be using a throwaway tag. Open death matches like Chelmsford could be wild, and everybody would be gunning for him anyway. "You sure he was going to show up today?" Micah asked. His left eye glazed orange as he was looking at media feeds. "Well, that was the rumour," Lano responded. "There's 3 days of games, 6 games a day," Micah noted. "I can't afford 18 tickets." "You don't have to. Maybe we'll meet him down in the street." Lano was hopeful. Peregrine was the best player in all of Britain, uncontested, and number 3 on Dorothy Garridar's top 10 international gun brawl pros list. The only people better than him in the entire world were Mun Gun, captain of the Shenzhen Shamans, and California, who was just a freak of nature. Just last week he'd taken Elainen by surprise with a flip shot. Nobody had ever taken Elainen by surprise. Ever. "First game starts in an hour," said Micah. "You want to grab a bite to eat before we get in there?" Lano shrugged. "Yeah." Maybe they would run into Peregrine at the cafe. He slotted in the burn chip. This was amazing. Lano had the 5th highest kill count of anyone in the game right now. Micah was on number 12. If Peregrine was watching this game, he'd be reading Lano's real tag right now. Peering over the barricade, he saw a tiny camera drone hovering above the converted parking lot, lens on him. Maybe Peregrine was actually seeing him right now. There was a whole group of players behind a wrecked car, just protected enough from Lano so that he couldn't hit them, but they could take pot shots at him. The moment one of them scored a kill on him, they would immediately turn on each other. Lano was determined not to let it come to that. Holding his breath, he targeted a mirror right behind the players camping him. His bright red full-auto loyalist was equipped with bouncer rounds, and the burn chip he'd just slotted in would quadruple his rate of fire when activated. He'd also picked up a blue slide wall earlier, which could pass through solid objects, and he combined it with a yellow one, which could bend. If he wanted to pull this off, timing would be crucial. As the players, unsuspecting of anything, continued taking opportunistic shots and missing, Lano carefully shaped the green slide wall with his fingers, then flicked it over, its vague outlines flying across the parking lot and through the car. Just when it was past, he turned it on. The virtual semicircle stopped and became visible to the campers. When they realized what was about to happen, it was already too late. Lano clicked on the burn chip and fired on the mirror. His bouncer rounds were reflected and shot right into the slide wall. In 2 seconds, he'd fired 200 rounds, all of which were low damage, but now bouncing back and forth inside the slide wall, hitting the campers again and again. The tags above their heads went grey, little skulls appearing to either side of them. Shouting angrily, they stormed off to get res packs. Lano would probably be seeing them later. He threw a wink at the camera drone. Grand Miss Crookpot was a legendary move of emergent gameplay invented by one of Peregrine's legendary idols. Lano had climbed to 2nd place in the rankings, but that didn't matter. Even if Peregrine hadn't been watching thus far, now he was surely paying attention. Quickly scanning his surroundings, Lano advanced underneath the passing road toward the Lidl. There had once been a time when no company would even touch Gunbrawl with 5-meter pincers. Now they had closed the store and decorated it like a post-apocalyptic wasteland for the event. Movement out of the corner of his eye. Lano spun and pulled the trigger, not even thinking. A guy in an almost retro-futuristic black trench coat recoiled as his name tag turned grey. He carried a Lombovos 47. Lano laughed as he pointed at the gun. The guy was a joker, not really interested in winning, but trotting out his meme rifle. At first, Lano thought the guy was laughing with him. He pointed the muzzle of the Lombovos at his chest and pulled the trigger. Because he was dead, no bullets came out. Or at least that was what should have happened. There was a flash, different than the virtual effect Lano was used to. 3 punches to his chest, and suddenly his vision was blurred. Lano stumbled backward, feeling his legs give out from under him. What was happening? D.I. Kaczmarek, this is my colleague D.I. Williams. Greg held up his badge before the 2 local bobbies. The tallest of them nodded and opened the way. All of them were on high alert, carrying light submachine guns. "Sergeant Davies is waiting for you," the bobby said, pointing to a lanky man in blue briefs and with an imprinted neon shirt shouting orders at uniformed officers. "Must have not been on duty," Rich noted as they jogged over to him. "You think?" Davies turned to them just before Greg would have said something to get his attention. "Rapid profiling?" he simply asked. "That's us," said Rich. "Thank fuck you're here. This shit is getting out of hand." Davies pointed in the vague direction of the city. "Shooters still at large, 17 dead, another 26 injured. We got 3 TFU standing by, but the cunt just slipped away. We need a profile immediately." "Not how that works, mate," Rich informed. "We got male, early 20s, black trench coat. He was using a Lombovos 47, which is weird." "Why?" asked Davis. "Because it's a terrible gun. It's bulky, and though it abides by all the rules so you could play it in any game format, nobody does," Greg explained. "It was fashioned after the AK-47, design-wise." "I thought these things weren't supposed to shoot bullets," Davies complained. "They're not even guns, they're computers. The muzzles are closed, there's no firing mechanisms in there, no bullets, just circuitry and sensors. It's all virtual." Greg pointed at the gun of a teenage boy lying dead on his back in front of the Lidl. Soko was swarming all over him. "I fucking know it's all virtual. I want to know how the fuck he got a real gun into a fucking AR shooting event," Davies spat. "He's good with technology, that's for sure. Probably a machining hobby of some kind, and access to some high-class 3D printers," said Rich. "Because the Lombovos is so big, I could imagine someone converting it into a gun. The question is how they spoof the signal to get it on the battlefield." "This is definitely someone with liberal access to university faculties," Greg decided. "High intelligence and education, obviously asocial, probably reclusive, and engaged with action cinema from the early century. Maybe fascinated with American massacres. He had a bad time at school and hoped uni would be better, but it wasn't. He does like it more than school, though, otherwise he would have attacked there." "Where are you getting all this from?" asked Davies. "He wore a black trench coat," said Rich. Greg pulled up the known route of the shooter across the battlefield. He'd spent the first 10 minutes of the game just wandering, using a different weapon, one that actually functioned for Gunbrawl. He'd been at the bottom of the field, using the throwaway tag Grimmest Reaper 667. Definitely a retro edgelord. "There hasn't been a mass shooting in England since 2022, said Davies before turning his attention back to his officers. "There's a technical college in Writtle, maybe he's headed there," said Rich. "No, school theory." Greg snapped his fingers. "Cross-reference student databases, local area, victim of bullying, tech students, interested in retro cinema, offensive and sometimes ironically self-deprecating sense of humor." After a few seconds of processing, several stacks of images with files appeared before Greg's eyes. Obviously limit the age range, currently late teens, early 20s, white, possibly mixed race. That narrowed it down to 3. It's that one, said Rich, who was sharing his org workspace. He was pointing at Henry Trianor, a 20-year-old born and raised in Chelmsford. His slim facial features did not match with the game footage. Looks completely different. Greg shook his head. That can be altered, easily. Biometric cameras have been consistently fooled for years now, and when you run around like that, people assume it's a costume. So if anybody notices the plastic applications on your face, they won't think it's suspicious. Rich pointed out. Could be, but why him specifically? Greg gestured over to the profiles of Nox Fulva and Tyrion Emin. These other two could have altered their features as well. Sure, but Emin is obviously from a nerdy household, so he would have gotten validation from his parents if he had been an outcast in school, and Fulva is just too tall. Ridge shrugged. I'm not excluding either of them definitively, but if I had to bet, and I do, then I'd say it's Trianor. Greg pressed Henry Trianor's image to unfold his full profile. He was indeed enrolled at the Technical College in neighbouring Rittle, and his usual gun brawl tag was Lord of Death, which was no less edgy than Grimmest Reaper 667. Sergeant Davies, the shooter will be heading for Great Barrow High School. You should at least send one TFU there. It's fucking Saturday evening, Davies roared. No fucking school on Saturdays! Or evenings! Greg opened the file on the high school and navigated to the itinerary. Theatre club's putting on Hamlet right now, he informed Davies. A note popped up. The system had discovered that Henry Trianor had been part of the drama club during his time at Great Barrow, but only the first year. Good find, he said to the soulless algorithm. Yeah, he's definitely going back to school, Rich agreed. The TFUs had already encircled Great Barrow High School when Greg and Rich arrived with Sergeant Davies. They'd been given firearms and ballistic vests, and were holding back between the heavily armed tactical units approaching the theatre building over an open field. Scout drones hovered above their heads and between school buildings, outlined in their org, but camouflaged for everyone else. A minimap was displayed in the lower left corner of their field of vision, and a translucent isometric floor plan was overlaid on the buildings. Reception area clear, no sign of MCA, somebody said over TAC voice. If you fuck this profile up and the cunt is shooting up some other place in town, Sergeant Davies mumbled so quietly only Greg and Rich could hear it. I'm confident he's gonna be here, said Rich. The profile is shots, bullets, whirring through the air over their heads. Greg felt a gust of wind as something passed by his face. The sod next to his foot blew up as it was struck. Get down, down, down! The TFU leader shouted. Greg fell flat on the ground, gun in hand, looking into where he believed the bullets had come from. There was a tree line with 2 clearings. One of them had several police vehicles parked in it. It had been their entry point onto school property. The other was a few houses away, poorly lit, and an excellent vantage point. There was a figure moving in the trees, a man wearing a trench coat. Greg fired, once, twice, and the man jerked away behind a tree. Hold fire! Sergeant Davis roared. Those are civilian houses, you twat! A cold shower ran over Greg's back. There were 10 officers lying in an open field against a single shooter in good cover that they were not allowed to shoot at. The fact that he just had might even cost him his job. Rich howled. He was writhing on the ground, holding his leg. He got me! The bloody fucker got me! A dark pool was rapidly spreading out from his thigh. One of the TFU officers jumped over Greg and lay down next to Rich. Hold still, he demanded. Keep pressure on the wound, he then instructed. What is it? Asked Greg. Hit the femoral artery, was the response. We need immediate medical assistance, Greg shouted into TAC voice. Officer down! Belay, said Davies, then looked at Greg. We're alone out here. Nobody can cross that space without getting shot by that madman. The TFU deployed 2 ballistic shields in front of Rich, and Greg rolled over the ground to be covered by them. He'll die in a minute! Look at the blood! The pool was spreading at an alarming rate. This is a trap, whispered Rich. He was never interested in the theatre group. He wanted us. Greg nodded. He was making the connections in his own head now. What the fuck are you on about? Davies hissed. His obsession with the early century, possibly the 90s also. Mass shootings were common back then, but were eventually stopped by police. He wanted to one-up them, Greg explained. Shots clanked against ballistic shields. Team 3 will be in position in 90 seconds. They'll have a clear shot, the TFU leader said. Rich is fucking bleeding out. He'll be dead by then. Greg aimed at the shooter, but Davies slammed his wrists into the ground. Fucking stop! No civilian casualties! The TFU medic was working fast to apply compress, but bullets kept zipping by his head. Will he make it? Greg asked. There was no response. Fuck this. Greg jumped up and ran. He sprinted diagonally to the line of fire. Whatever weapon the shooter had improvised, it seemed to be no better than spray and pray. Rich had been an unlucky shot. There would be no second unlucky shot. Blades of grass were flung in his face as the sod around him was ravaged. Davies roared behind him, but he did not understand a word of what the sergeant was saying. A hot pain cut across his shoulder blade. There was no impact, only a slice. He might have been hit, he might not. Greg did not care. He kept on running. A tree. He pressed his back against it, breathing heavily. Pain ran through his shoulder, but it was manageable. Or maybe it wasn't. There was a lot of adrenaline in his system, so did it really matter? The next step would be crucial. The shooter had the rifle aimed at the tree but was not firing. He was standing 20 meters away, by a tree of his own, his line of fire funneled over a pedestrian path. Depending on which side Greg emerged from, he might be dead in a second. But Rich was bleeding out on that field. He had to do something. Greg screamed. Bullets flew past the right side of the tree. He emerged from the left, firing repeatedly at the assailant. The trenchcoat winced in pain as he collapsed. His rifle clattered on the ground. Greg put 3 more rounds in him, just to be sure. MCA is down, I repeat, MCA is down, he said in tack voice. Without waiting for confirmation, paramedics rushed across the open field toward the TFU. The shooter was dead, and Rich was going to make it. You're a fucking madman, Kaczmarek, Sergeant Davies said. He did not sound angry, but genuinely impressed. This might cost you your badge, but you're a legend in my book. Greg collapsed against the tree, panting. He dropped his gun in the grass and looked down the road. Paramedics rushed to him, examined his shoulder. As the adrenaline receded, it all became a blur.
If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.